This video is sponsored by The Standoff. More about this event later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is another huge weekend for 40k, with massive numbers of GTs and GT plus level events being attended by the community. This includes several majors, including the Tennessee Elite Open that I am traveling back from covering this weekend. I'm currently on my laptop, so I hope that the audio sounds okay, and traveling back from live streaming that. If you want to see some competitive games of Warhammer 40k, check out my coverage of that event, especially some of the members videos that I have from my second recorded table. We had some incredible results on those games, including several games that came down to the final battle round of secondary scoring in order to determine a final victor. But in addition to that, we also had a new super major level event in the form of the Paris Wargame Expo, which brought 400 players together. Now, that said, we will not be talking about this event in this particular video, largely because it was a 400-player event that only ran 5 rounds, meaning it had almost 10 undefeated players. I'm not going to be including them in the stats for this video, but I will be covering that entire event in a separate live stream later this week. Additionally, there are a couple events that are currently ongoing at the time of recording. It's 9 p.m. U.S. Central Time when I'm recording this right now, and those events are still ongoing. If they do end up before I end up finishing this recording, I'll add them into the stats later on here, but right now I don't know what the results of those events are. That said, let's go ahead and hop into our metagame breakdown and talk about what is currently doing well. And honestly, the metagame continues to look very solid. There is a little bit of a push up towards a couple of factions, in my opinion, most notably Aeldari and Tau Empire are looking incredibly strong. However, many factions are capable of going 5-0 or undefeated in their respective events, and we have an enormous breadth of factions with multiple undefeated results. As I mentioned before, Aeldari are at the top here with 3 undefeated results: Full Range Extinction, 5th Annual Flames of Autumn GT, and Nova Hammer, where they tied for the final placement. Tyranids also doing fairly well with a win at Level Up Gaming, Queen City Oktoberfest, and a tie for the final placement at Bastion GT. That's X0-1 with a natural 72-point draw, which is pretty wild. World Eaters took down the NY04 GT, Kippers Melee, and Rose City Ruckus Singles. Tau Empire taking down the big Tennessee Elite Open, which I live streamed. You can watch exactly how Tau Empire won that event over on my live tab on the channel. Elb Coast Cup 19 and the 40k Invitational GT. Chaos Knights went undefeated at the Malmo Wargaming Weekend 9, as well as Rapid Fire GT. Necrons also had an undefeated result at Kippers Melee, as well as Lakes of Blood Rotorua. Chaos Demons took down Prestige Gaming GT, as well as GT La Laguna. Astra Militarum won Surrey Primarchs GT, as well as the Halton Heretics Bash, with a very cool tank spam list. Adeptus Mechanicus actually only went undefeated at one event, but they put 2 players into 5-0. That was at the Malmo Wargaming Weekend. That was a major level event that only ran 5 rounds, so it did have a total of 3 undefeated players, 2 of which being Adeptus Mechanicus, and then 1 of them being Chaos Knights, as we discussed previously. Raven Guard took down the Elb Coast Cup 19, as well as tying with Tyranids for the final game at the Bastion GT. That's Shadowmark Talon continuing to do fairly well. Space Marines did well in other factions. On top of that, Blood Angels taking down the Queen City Oktoberfest, and Space Wolves winning ValleyCon Open GT. We also saw Adepta Sororitas as one of the 2 undefeated alongside Aeldari at the 5th Annual Flames of Autumn GT. Thousand Suns taking down the GT Legans. Orks going undefeated at Kippers Melee. Grey Knights taking down the Magnolia Massacre at Warpfire Games. Emperor's Children as another undefeated result at NY04 GT. And last but certainly not least, Chaos Space Marines at the North Coast Games GT. Now we're going to go ahead and hop into those lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by The Standoff, a multi-gaming tournament that's featuring a large Warhammer 40k GT. The Standoff is one of the premier events for Warhammer 40k and other miniature games in New England, being held in Portland, Maine from November 22nd to 23rd, and in addition to the Warhammer 40k GT featuring events from Kill Team, Marvel Crisis Protocol, and Age of Sigmar. I've been a longtime fan of The Standoff. It presents custom terrain for all its games in an extremely friendly environment, and it's just generally a good vibe. I'll be there live streaming the 40k event, so even if you can't catch it on the day, you'll be able to watch along, but obviously we would all prefer to see you there in person. So I'll see you at The Standoff 2025 from November 22nd to 23rd in Portsmouth, Maine. Check out the links in the video description for more information and tickets. Starting with Aeldari at the full range extinction event, Agus Duran went undefeated at that event with an Aeldari aspect host. This list was led by an Avatar of Cain, which is why we're talking about it today, because it's cool that 2 weeks back to back we saw Aeldari take down events using the Avatar. That's incredibly sick. It was also supported by a trio of Phoenix Lords, Fuegan the Fire Lord, Jane Zar, as well as Lycus. We had a single Wave Serpent to use Skyborn Sanctuary on a unit of 10 Fire Dragons that would attach in with Fuegan, 2 units of Dark Reapers for some long-range shooting, a Howling Banshee unit to attach with Jane Zar, 1 single Ranger Squad for utility alongside 2 units of Striking Scorpions to take over the midboard with lots of Infiltrators. We had 3 units of Swooping Hawks for some additional utility, a single War Walker to buff some of those long-range shooting with that +1 AP bonus, and 2 units of Warp Spiders to support Lycus and generally make their opponent very upset. Fairly standard stuff from an Eldar aspect host. However, the inclusion of that Avatar of Cain is pretty classy. There was something in the water over at the Queen City Oktoberfest because we had 2 undefeated players go 5-0 at that event, both of which we'll talk about today. Because, first of all, Kyle Lamperez went undefeated at the event with Tyranids with an incredibly cool list that I love. This was a subterranean assault list, reserve and deep strike oriented Tyranid detachment, lets you build tunnels with your burrowing units. This is typically done by Raveners, who can use their up-down effect to create tunnel markers. However, Kyle said, not today, crime, and instead used 3 Trigons to build tunnels. They're basically like Raveners, but they don't up down for free, and they cost like 50 points more. That said, the army was able to pay to allow those Trigons to go in and out of reserve because it had 2 Hive Tyrants, both a Swarmlord and a standard melee-equipped Hive Tyrant with Scything Talons and a Bone Sword. From there, we also had 2 Neuro Tyrants. That's right, 2 of them. These guys' auras don't stack, so they aren't able to provide multiple Battle Shock penalties on the Shadow and the Warp turn. However, you can attach both of them to different Zoanthrope units to give both of them +1 to hit. We can then use the tunnel markers created by Trigons to put them 6 inches away from enemies in weird spots, flamer them to death with the Neurotyrants, and then shoot their tanks into oblivion with Zoanthropes. That's including 2 units of 6 Zoanthropes in order to attach those characters. We had 2 Lictors and a Biovore for utility and scoring. The 3 Trigons I mentioned earlier, one of them upgraded to a character with Trigon Prime for additional weapon skill and strength, plus 2 Maleceptors to actually take over the midboard with some very hardy profiles. All this together allows the army to dump its melee monsters directly into the fight, or bring in those Zoanthropes in order to shoot down enemies on oblique lines of sight. The Hive Tyrants both are incredibly effective in this detachment. They have somewhere around 8 to 10 attacks, depending on which one you're discussing. They full hit and wound reroll most of those attacks, since their Bone Swords or Bone Sabers are twin-linked and get reroll 1s to hit on a 2+ weapon skill from the detachment ability, meaning that they're actually very good into a variety of situations. Swarmlord gives you free command points in order to fuel your subterranean assault stratagems, plus taxes enemy command points when he jumps in to attack out of a tunnel network. And then the other Hive Tyrant can allow the Trigons to go into reserve using the Uppy Downy stratagem in the detachment for free every round, and then he also can hit pretty hard as well. I really think that double Hive Tyrant's pretty cool and neat, and I think that Subterranean Assault definitely has an archetype that can support it. It's probably one of the best places to run double Hive Tyrants. It is a detachment that spends enough command points that you will actually go through all of those free command points that you're gaining, and with those rear ones to hit, as I mentioned before, the Hive Tyrants become pretty solid attackers themselves. The interesting part here is these Zoanthrope units. 2 units of Zoanthropes is a lot. They are relatively easy to kill once they're out of the tunnels. However, with 12 of them, they may be actually able to overpower a lot of opposing offensive profiles. And clearly it works for Kyle because he went 5-0 with this list. That's insane. Now with that, we'll move over to Kipper's Melee to talk about Jordan Gallagher's World Eaters. Kipper's was another large major level event that only ran 5 rounds, so it ended with 3 undefeated players. This time, they all played different factions, however. Jordan was rocking a Berserker Warband with a Demon Prince with the Helm of Brazen Ire to reduce incoming damage, Karn the Betrayer, a Juggernaut Lord with Favorite of Khorne to give rerolls on Blessings of Khorne dice rolls, as well as the Slaughterbound equipped with the absolute nuclear missile that is the Berserker Glaive to give him up to 4 damage targeting monsters and vehicles if he attaches to it is the unit of Exalted 8-bound that is also in the list. We had 2 units of 10 Khorne Berserkers, one of them to attach with Karn, one with the Juggernaut Lord, both of them being 10 models, and a Rhino to carry Karn around. 3 units of Chaos Spawn added some utility to the army alongside some Jackal units for the backline, 2 Forge Fiends for shooting, and 2 units of 8-bound, 1 standard 8-bound unit and 1 Exalted 8-bound unit to attach the Slaughterbound into. Pretty standard stuff from Berserker Warband. We've been seeing a lot of builds almost identical to this one becoming popular. Definitely seems to be working since it's capable of putting multiple players undefeated this weekend. With that, we'll move over to the 120-player Tennessee Elite Open, which only had 1 undefeated player, despite generally going to a length where you would oftentimes see multiple. However, in every single situation, the pair up player 1, basically shrinking an odd-numbered undefeated player pool to 1 at the end. And that one was Ken Edwards, who was playing a Kauyon list. Now, this variety of Kauyon has been growing in popularity more recently, and it's extremely consistent. It basically has the firepower to overpower the opponent in the early game, which then obviously becomes even better in the later game once it unlocks sustained hits. So if you engage with it early, it can still fight with you just because it's basically focused entirely on ranged attacks, and in the late game, it becomes even more powerful. This includes Commander Shadowsun as the only commander, a Breacher team in a Devilfish, a Ghostkeel battlesuit to stall out the game in the midboard, 1 Hammerhead gunship for a long-range attack to punch through armor saves, a Crude Carnivore unit for some objective secure, a Crutonx Rider unit just for additional utility, plus a Pathfinder team in order to scout and infiltrate and block up the midboard, 2 Piranhas, as well as 3 Riptide battlesuits, 2 Skyray gunships, a Vespid Stingwing unit for additional utility, plus 2 units of stealth battlesuits to spot enemies. Incredibly straightforward Tau list. This is largely kind of just Tau good stuff. Riptide battlesuits and Skyray gunships are phenomenal range platforms as long as you can stall out the game in the midboard using the Pathfinders and the Kroot. For a turn or 2, you can get Kauyon active, and those things start to do so much damage that your opponent is really unable to deal with them. Again, if you want to see this list in action several times over the course of the weekend, check out my coverage. I will link it in the video description. I streamed Ken a couple of times on his path to winning the event. Now with that, we'll move over to the first event from the Malmo Wargaming Weekend 9 that we're going to discuss. This is Bjorn Eriksson, who ran Chaos Knights. Fortunately for us, Chaos Knights are kind of a mono list at this point. Bjorn was running an Infernal Lance. We did have a single Knight Despoiler with Flesh Metal Fusion, grants him additional survivability. 2 more Knight Despoilers, all of those equipped with double Despoiler Gatling Cannons. In this case, we chose not to take Rodriguez, instead focusing a little bit more heavily on Carnivore, taking 3 Carnivores with multi-launchers on their Carapace weapon mount, alongside 3 Beasts of Nurgle to add a bunch of utility to the demon component of the army. Those guys are being unlocked by a Playbearer unit to obsect the backline, as well as 2 units of Nurglings to screen the army out. Pretty standard stuff from Chaos Knights. Been seeing a couple varieties. Most of them are revolving around the 3 Despoiler Gatling Cannon Knights. That seems like the staple of the faction. Now, in the interest of staying on the same event, we'll continue to talk about the Malmo Wargaming Weekend and talk about Johannes Idemo, who went undefeated with Halo Screed Battleclade, one of the 2 Halo Screed Battleclades in the 5-0 bracket of the event, although both of them were slightly different. In this case, Johannes was playing a Belisarius Call, 2 units of Rangers, as well as a Skitari Vanguard unit to unlock battleline synergies. We did have some backline shooting from a single Onager Dunecrawler, that being equipped with an Eradication Beamer, plus a trio of Iron Strider Ballistari, and 3 Scorpius Disintegrators. From there, the majority of the list was composed of Sicarians. We had 2 units of 10 Sicarian Infiltrators and 2 units of 10 Sicarian Ruststalkers. These guys were able to absolutely jail the opponent into their corner. The Sicarian Infiltrators can stage up in the center of the table, push forward with Advance and Charge from the Halo Screed Battleclade detachment ability. They can get enhanced critical hits from the detachment as well, and really blitz down the opponent, but the big benefit is that they're able to be relatively resilient, standing in the middle of the table, and then charge their opponent early. You then have the Ruststalkers that can follow up, that have an even faster threat range and higher damage output, that can actually kill their opponent off their home objectives, all the while you're constructing space for your big guns to continue to shoot them. We also had a Calidus Assassin in there as well, in order to disrupt enemy defensive strats and to gain some additional utility. From there, we'll go back to the Kippers Melee to talk about the eventual winner of the event, who went 5-0 but had the highest tiebreakers. Idevol Heimdall is back with his characteristic OBS into Phalanx. I've talked about this list every once in a while when Idevol decides to take it to an event and win. It is an insane combination of defensive technology on a Lich Guard unit. We can combine things like bonus OC from the detachment alongside a Catacomb Command Barges to give these guys a massive OC characteristic. They are difficult to kill. They can trail back to Convergence of Dominions in order to give them a Feel No Pain, and they can get that +1 to wound from the detachment against specific targets as well. well. We are including a Catacomb Command Barge, a pair of Overlords, one of them with Warrior Noble, one with Honorable Combatant, alongside Amotech the Stormlord to attach into all those Lich Guard units. We have a Canoptic Reanimator and a Canoptic Spider, so we have a Feel No Pain available for the vehicles and additional reanimation. 3 Doomsday Arcs to sit behind those Lich Guard and continuously pound gunshots downrange. A single Locust Heavy Destroyer with a Gauss Destructor in order to act as a utility unit. Plus, obviously, that Convergence of Dominion that's going to sit in its deployment zone and generate a Feel No Pain for the infantry, as well as the Spider giving one to the vehicles. From there, speaking of vehicles, we have 2 Annihilation Barges. Been a while since we've seen these on the table. They are 100 points, but they come in with a solid 4+ invulnerable quantum shield save, and you have a -1 damage for vehicle stratagem inside Obeisance Phalanx. So, for 100 points, you get a little dude with an annoying invuln save who can run onto an objective, and your opponent has to wildly overcommit to kill them. They're not just going to die to a single activation. They're going to require some actual anti-tank to kill, which then forces it to move into line of sight, in which you can attack with your Doomsday Arcs. Kind of a cute inclusion. Sometimes we see Triarch Stalkers in here to fill that slot as well, but the Annihilation Barges obviously are a little bit less expensive than those things, which can certainly help free up points for all of the other synergies that the list is trying to include. Now with that, we're going to move on to Chaos Demons. Chris Rayner took down the Prestige Wargaming GT number 2 with Chaos Demons, and not any Chaos Demons. We've been seeing a lot of success from things like various varieties of Shadow Legion, as well as Demonic Incursion, but Chris said, no, I will not be a slave to the meta. Instead, I will be a slave to the Lord of Excess, because I'm going to play Legion of Excess, which is wild. This detachment has not really seen that much competitive play basically since the beginning of the year, when it was incredibly strong after its release during the Grotsmas drop, and it immediately got nerfed into oblivion. Not to mention the fact that in the later Codex Demons Index update, all of the Slaaneshi demons got nerfed even further. That said, this list is wild. It's bringing Bellicor to protect itself from early game shooting that allows it to play its Keepers of Secrets a little bit more aggressively than you normally would by giving them an 18-inch lone operative effect. Speaking of which, we do have those 3 Keepers of Secrets, one of them equipped with Soul Glutton, which can heal it when it destroys enemies in melee. These Keepers of Secrets are an interesting inclusion because they are relatively expensive but don't hit very hard. Their base strength characteristics are low, even though their AP and movement characteristics are very high. Although at this point, they are not that hard to kill because they've lost their Feel No Pain. They're instead just coming in with a -1 to hit effect. In this case, all of the Keepers of Secrets here are equipped with whips as well to give them some additional ranged options. Now, you do have access to a couple of bonuses in Legion of Excess that can keep them dealing damage for a little bit longer. This includes the detachment ability, which allows them to be struck first in melee, however get reroll 1s to wound, as well as reroll hits. On top of that, you can also use Archagonists to give them +1 to wound in melee, which can allow them to alleviate their normally relatively tepid strength characteristics. If they're fighting most vehicles, that gets them to wound them on 4s, which with reroll 1s to hit and a very high AP characteristics can allow them to do some serious damage. Not to mention the fact that Bellicor will swing into light to medium vehicles very well with his AP 4 D6 +1 damage sword. Now from there, the army is trying as hard as it can to keep its opponent off base on primary. This is accomplished with 5 units of Demonettes. We also have Celesk in the army as well, although whether or not they were attaching onto a Demonette unit to give them their weird critical 5-up effect, or just deep striking innately as a normal utility unit that can regenerate, so is typically not worth the time trying to kill. I'm not 100% sure. However, we do have a pair of Transweavers. The Transweavers can also help to alleviate the relatively low strength characteristic of the army by giving you full rerolls to wound from all Slaanesh demon units against a single battle-shocked enemy within 12 inches of them. If we have 2 of them and are getting bonuses from the Shadow of Chaos in order to battle-shock enemies, there is a non-zero chance that we could potentially be getting those wound rerolls active. Then at any point at which an enemy fails a battle-shock check, we can start to do some serious damage to them. On top of that, we also have a single Beast of Nurgle to act as utility. Fairly simple list, but I'm sure it plays much more complexly given the fact that we are playing a bunch of Slaanesh demons that are mathematically kind of underpowered, but when their synergies are all stacked together can do some serious damage, as well as having an enormous number of extremely fast OC2 infantry with +1 to charge from their demonic instruments, which can keep enemies off balance on objectives. Now we're going to move over to Astra Militarum, which won the Halton Heretics post-Thanksgiving Warhammer 40k bash. Nick Jagiello took this one down using a Hammer of the Emperor detachment for Astra Militarum. This is the vehicle-focused detachment that gives them faster movement with the ability to advance auto 6 inches rather than rolling, as well as has stratagems to do things like fall back and shoot and advance and shoot. In this case, we're running Gaunt's Ghosts alongside a pair of Rogaldorn commanders, one of them with Calm Under Fire, allowing it to duplicate one of its orders after issuing it. We have a Cadian Shock Trooper unit for the backline, a pair of cavalry squads, one unit of 5 Attilan Rough Riders, as well as a unit of 5 Death Riders, 2 Hellhounds to strip cover from enemies, some early game utility from a unit of Krieg Combat Engineers to use their scout move, a Leman Russ Exterminator for bonus AP that can combo with the Hellhounds for basically plus 2 AP on a lot of the other Leman Russ weapons, as well as the Rogaldorns, which do have a kind of middling AP characteristic, giving them ignore cover or AP bonuses, allows them to punch through a lot of high armor save characteristics. We have 3 Leman Russ Vanquishers as the cheapest Leman Russ variant and good in a straight up tank battle, alongside a Rattling squad. Oftentimes we'll see a transport for the Rattlings to go into in order to hop in and out of that transport, but in this case we are not going to be running any of those. We're just going to be having them as early game screamers. We then also have 3 individual Scout Sentinels for some additional utility. From there, we'll move over to the Elb Coast Cup 19, where Sebastian Mock went undefeated with Ravengard, winning the event. Not the only undefeated player there. We also saw Tau Empire at 5-0. But in this case, Ravengard did take the event down. This was with a Shadow Mark Talon detachment and looks pretty similar to most of the Shadow Mark Talon detachments that we've been seeing. However, a couple of very small differences. This includes the inclusion of some Terminators. We have Eighth and Sean in there to give the up-down strat for free, alongside a Jump Pack Captain with Hunter's Instincts to allow that turn 1 rapid ingress to get him stuck into the enemy immediately upon the game beginning. We have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant with Coronal Susurrant to give it the command point Tax Aura, plus Caven Shrike for a second unit of Vanguard Veterans. He gives them the Phobos keyword so they can use Advance and Charge. Now, interestingly, we also have a Terminator Ancient with the Blackwing Shroud. This is the equivalent in the detachment of Blade Driven Deep, giving the unit Infiltrators, and he's going to attach in with a unit of 5 Assault Terminators with Storm Shields and Thunderhammers. That gives you a relatively aggressively positioned unit of Terminators that can either be used as utility early, very resilient objective holders, especially with bonus OC from a attached Ancient, but you can also use the up-down strat to put them into reserve and then deep strike them later on over the course of the game for free. So if your opponent has utility stuff that they're going to be putting in the center of the table, you can kill it very early with those Thunderhammers and then use them as utility later on. Kind of an interesting inclusion, definitely a little different than what we typically see. We're also seeing 9 Centurion Devastators, a unit of 6 as well as a unit of 3, 6 Inceptors to bring them in off the table early in order to 6-inch deep strike them later on, even from the bottom of round 1, since they have deep strike built in, a pair of Infiltrator squads for the backline, and those 2 Vanguard Veteran squads we discussed earlier. Standard stuff from Shadow Mark Talon besides those Terminators, which are a cool little piece of technology. Cool thing as well is that they can also go into strategic reserve, hold in reserve, because the Shadow Mark Talon detachment stratagem doesn't require that they come in immediately like some reserve stratagems do, and it allows you to rapid ingress them for free, since they can still put a teleport homer down on the table even if they don't begin the game in reserve, which allows them to then rapid ingress for free later on over the course of the game. So you can just kind of hold them and wait for an opportunity to strike. Very Ravengard-esque. Now, I mentioned there was something in the water over there in Queen City for the Queen City Oktoberfest, and that is because we also had Chris Green going undefeated at that event with Blood Angels and a pretty wild Blood Angels list. Now, I've actually talked about this list previously on previous episodes of this series, and it's a cool one. This includes a Blood Angels captain with Rage Field Warrior, so we get that sustained hits 3, that sweet sustained hits 3, a trio of Death Company Jump Pack captains, which grant their units sustained hits, plus the Death Company rerolls allows them to get some pretty high efficiency attacks. We have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for utility, as well as a Sanguinary Priest with Speed of the Primarch. He can dual attach alongside the captain into a unit of 10 Assault Intercessor squads to buff up their attacks, and then also use things like Lance and Lethal for free from the attached captain. He's also then going to get wound rerolls from the unit against enemies on objectives, which triggers more devastating wounds from his Finest Hour ability. Plus, he also has Rage Field Warrior, so he's going to be getting a trillion extra hits. This is a huge unit that has an enormous amount of damage. We have an Intercessor squad for the backline, a Land Raider Redeemer to to deliver that big unit of 10 Assault Intercessors, 2 Ballistic Dreadnoughts for some backline shooting, 3 units of 5 Death Company Marines, as we discussed, to attach with their attendant captains, a Gladiator Lancer to add some even more shooting to the army, plus an Infiltrator Squad and a Scout Squad for some utility. The interesting thing here is that a lot of these attacks are relatively self-sufficient. The Lancer and the Ballistic Dreadnought have built-in rerolls. We don't necessarily need to Oath of Moment any particular target, since you can rely on things like the Ballistic Dreadnought rerolls, or the Lancer's built-in reroll, or even the Death Company Marines rerolls, and save the Oath of Moment for something that, for example, the Assault Intercessors are attacking. Now, with that, we are going to move over to the 5th annual Flames of Autumn GT, which saw 2 undefeated players, both Aeldari being piloted by Zach Point, but also Adepta Sororitas being taken by Jeffrey Kolodner. In this case, Jeffrey was playing a relatively standard variety of Hallowed Martyrs detachment, the likes of which we've seen several times before. This includes a utility Canoness, a jump pack Canoness with Through Suffering Strength to do some insane damage, a single Imagifier plus Junith Eruita, Morven Vol to attach to a unit of Paragon Warsuits, plus a single Palatine. We have a pair of Battle Sister squads. Those can combat squad in Immolator. It's also included in the list. This one equipped with multi-meltas. We have a pair of Castigators, both of them equipped with battle cannons, a trio of Mortifiers for some utility and Miracleized Generation once they go down, plus a Paragon Warsuit unit, a Celestian Sacrosanct unit, which oftentimes gets attached with Judith Eruita to get -1 to be hit and wounded, but in some cases can attach some of the other characters, a Sanctifier unit for some early game shenanigans, plus utility from a Zephyrim squad and a Calidus Assassin. Now we'll move on and talk about some more Space Marines with Space Wolves, which took down the ValleyCon Open GT. Drew Ward piloted a Stormlance task force to an undefeated result. This included a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, Logan Grimnar, and a standard Wolf Priest. We have the classic attachment of the Wolf Priest into a Wolfguard Head Takers unit. These guys were equipped with Storm Shield, so they're a little tougher. That allows the Wolf Priest more opportunity to use his ability to respond them, but he also gives them +1 to wound, which is nice. A little bit difficult to gain that in Stormlance Task Force typically. We have 2 units of 5 Storm Shield Wolfen to add some additional melee infantry, a unit of 5 Wolfguard Terminators to attach with Logan Grimnar, some backline shooting from a pair of Predator Destructors. Those guys were supported by an Incursor Squad for +1 to hit. We have an Intercessor Squad to hold down the backline objective, and an Impulsor to carry around those Wolfguard Head Takers. From there, we have 18 Thunderwolf Cavalry. Pretty standard inclusion for these guys. Just a bunch of dudes on dogs that run and get up in your grill and are really fast and hit kind of hard, so pretty standard. Now, in what I guess is a thematically appropriate continuant, we can talk about some Thousand Suns. Tiraxer El Rojo went undefeated with Thousand Suns at the GT Leganes. This was a Grand Coven detachment, the most common detachment for Thousand Suns, but included a enormous number of Rubric Marines and Sorcerers, kind of eschewing a lot of the other units that typically get played in this detachment. This included a pair of Exalted Sorcerers, one of them with Incendium, another one with Umbralific Crystal. Those are Foot Exalted Sorcerers, by the way, not the disc-mounted variety. These guys improved their unit's survivability with a 4+ invulnerable save and the ability to restore models back to the unit, in addition to bringing a naturally devastating wound weapon as well, which combos well with the Rubric Marines' built-in rerolls against enemies on objectives. We have an Infernal Master with the +1 damage from Eldritch Vortex of Etaf, Magnus the Red, and a Standard Sorcerer. Those guys are going to attach into 4 of the 4 units of 5 Rubric Marines. We have a Chaos Rhino to carry some of those around to the battlefield, and some long-range shooting provided by a Megalith Vortex Beast, as well as a Forge Fiend. Early game utility is provided by a Sekatar Robot unit with Infiltrate. We have a unit of Fatecaster Greatbow Zangor Enlightened, as well as 2 Natural Zangor units in order to add some more normal utility. There's a lot of interesting exploration being done with this detachment. Things like the Exalted Sorcerers giving themselves the ability to regenerate bodyguard models back to the unit, allow you to do things like take damage on your Aspiring Sorcerers inside a Rubric Marine squad. They have an additional wound in the new codex, so they can take some extra damage. You can use Destiny by Fate on the unit champion himself, because he's a Psyker. Once he dies, the Exalted Sorcerer can then respawn him, and you can continue to do that. That's kind of cool. So there is definitely some technology being explored in Thousand Suns, which is neat. Now, this is kind of the Kippers Melee week for Best RPG 40k, because we're going to go back to Kippers Melee to talk about Jordan Salomon and his Orks. Jordan, in this case, was playing a War Horde pretty standard stuff at this point. We've been seeing a lot of Warhordes more recently. This includes a Beast Boss, a Big Mech with Follow Me Lads to improve the speed of his unit. He also guarantees reroll advance rolls. We have Boss Snickrot, Gaskell Thraka, who typically dual attaches with the Big Mech in order to give both leadership bonuses, makes Gaskell Thraka significantly faster. We have a War Boss plus a Mega Armor War Boss with Super Cyborg Body and Zodgrod Wartsnaga. From there, we've got a unit of 20 boys, which oftentimes attaches to Gaskell to make use of his leadership bonus. We have a Beast Snaga Boy unit for the Beast Boss to hop into, a trio of trucks to carry some of these guys around this battlefield, a unit of 20 Gretchen to attack in with Zodgrod Wartsnaga and absolutely gum up the middle of the table with the scout move plus -1 to be hit and wounded that he provides. We have a Break a Boys squad to attach with one of those war bosses, 10 flash kits to clear out enemy utility stuff, a Commandos unit to split into 5s for utility, a unit of Mega Knobs to attach to the Super Cyborg Mega Armor War Boss, plus a Standard Knobs unit and several more units of Gretchen for some additional utility. Now moving over to the Magnolia Massacre. This one was won by David Ozawa, running a Warpbane Task Force Grey Knights. If you actually want to see a lot of content from David playing Grey Knights, you can check out my coverage of the Crucible GT, especially my recorded tables for YouTube channel members, because we played several games with him on stream over at that event. But in this case, David was playing, I think, basically the similar list that he was playing in that in that major. This included a trio of Brotherhood Librarians, Castellan Crow to attach into a unit of 10 Purifiers, plus a pair of Nemesis Grandmasters. The Brotherhood Librarians are interesting in here because they have a pretty solid ranged attack, in addition to being relatively inexpensive utility units, at least for Grey Knight standards. You can pay 120 plus points for an infantry unit, or you can pay 80 for a single individual guy who shoots almost as well as an entire unit melees and is almost half the cost. We then have a pair of Razorbacks, a Strike Squad, 2 Purifier Squads to attach into those 2 Razorbacks, a Land Raider, which can either deliver the 10 Purifier unit in the early game, or you can use it just as a big gun platform, a standard Nemesis Dread Knight, plus all of the backline Purifier Squads that I discussed previously. Interesting to note here is that David's 10 model Purifier Squad was equipped with silencers. Since they get so many hit and wound rerolls, the vast volume from the silencers actually makes a lot of sense, but it enables them to fight at longer range as well. Oftentimes we'll see incinerators on these guys, however, then they don't get the benefit of their hit rerolls from the detachment, and also they have to engage within 12 inches to make use of those. But the silencers can fire at 24, so you can still clear enemy utility units without having to expose the squad. His standard 5-man Purifier squads do have the incinerators attached in them, and if they're inside the Razorbacks, they can gain +1 AP, so you can have AP to ignore cover, wound rerolling flamers, which is pretty spicy. Now from there, we're going to move over to the NY04 GT. This event ended up being won by World Eaters, but the runner-up was playing Emperor's Children. Rhys McDonald, in this case, running an interesting variety of Coterie of the Conceited. That's more standard detachment option for the Emperor's Children, but a lot of times we've been seeing a bit of a restraint from players taking a lot of the characters. So things like Demon Princes and Lord Cacophonous and Lord Exaltants have been slowly being shaved out of armies in exchange for more heavy armor, things like Mauler Fiends, for example. However, in this case, Rhys has gone basically the opposite direction. He has 3 Lord Exaltants plus 3 Infractor squads, 3 Demon Princes, all of them equipped with enhancements, one with Pledge of Mortal Pain to do mortal wounds to enemies, one with Pledge of Eternal Servitude in order to respawn himself when killed, and one with Pledge of Unholy Fortune to give himself some auto 6s on his dice rolls. We have 3 units of Infractors to attach those Lord Exaltants into, 2 units of Tormentors for some early game utility, 2 Chaos Rhinos to carry all those guys to the fight, and then 3 Noise Marine squads, 1 Lord Cacophonist to attach in with that Noise Marine squad as well. So fairly standard for the most part, but we have been seeing more of those Mauler Fiends and more of those other armored units in exchange for these characters. However, the characters are still incredibly effective by themselves, and so in many cases are going to be the superior option, especially if you're not having to deal with extremely high toughness characteristics. And it's cool to see that this style of Coterie of the Conceited is still seeing some play. Now with that, we're going to move over to the North Coast Games first ever Invitational GT. This event was won by Joshua Minich, who is playing a Chaos Cult in Chaos Space Marines. This includes Cypher, a trio of Dark Communes, as well as Vashtor the Archiphane. We do have Incendiary Goad on one of those Dark Communes. Following that up are a trio of Cultist Mobs, 1 unit of Traitor Guardsmen, 10 in each of those squads, 48 Accursed Cultists to attach into the Dark Communes, alongside 2 Predator Annihilators. That's being backed up by no less than a Knight Despoiler with double Despoiler Gatling Cannon, which provides some pretty serious self-sufficient shooting to the army, which is an army that is typically relatively underpowered at range just because it's relying on kind of Dark Pacting Chaos Space Marine units that don't have a lot of these synergies that normally make them so great. The Knight Despoiler could just sit there in the back and plow away with 36 Despoiler Gatling Cannon shots without a problem. It's definitely an interesting variety of Chaos Cult. I don't know if I would have expected to see one that is relying so heavily on Chaos Knight allies to do well, but it's cool to see that this style of mixed Chaos Space Marines is still effective. And with that, we're going to move over to the Rooks 40k Open. I actually didn't include this in my original discussion because this event just finished, literally as I was recording this video. In this case, we had 2 undefeated players, both of them playing Space Marines in 2 separate chapters, both of which we'll talk about. The first one, the #1 placement in the event, was James Walsh, running a Company of Hunters Dark Angels detachment. This includes 3 Ravenwing command squads, one of them with Mastercrafted Weapon to improve the output of the Ravenwing Champion, one of them with Recon Hunter to give the unit Scout 9, and one of them with Master of Maneuver. Following that up are 3 Outrider squads, which are going to attach into those Ravenwing command squads and give them +1 strength and damage on the charge. We then have a trio of Centurion Devastator squads. The nice thing here is that these guys are able to advance and shoot thanks to the detachment ability. They lose the ability to advance and charge if they are not in a mounted unit. However, being able to improve their threat range on a relatively short movement unit is very effective. We have a single unit of Ravenwing Black Knights, 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, 2 Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes to strip cover from enemies and make those Centurion Devastators even more impactful. Important to note here that they are equipped with grav cannons, so they are incredibly strong against vehicles. The downside being that their AP characteristic is low, so cover is annoying. However, the Hammer Strikes allow them to do some serious damage. We then have a Scout Squad for utility, as well as a single Invader ATV. Now, last and maybe least for this video is going to be Colin K, also at the Rooks 40k Open, who went undefeated, not winning the event, but at second place on tiebreakers with Salamanders. Now, this wasn't a Firestorm Assault Force, unfortunately, for all you Salamanders fans out there. Forge Father Seekers still relatively unplayed because it does lose a lot of the synergy that Firestorm Assault Force can bring, such as the Champion of Humanity and Rapid Embarkation stratagems. This includes Adrax Agatone alongside a Judiciar with Champion of Humanity that prevents enemies from modifying his unit's attack, so things like Armor of Contempt or damage reduction effects do not apply to him, which is cool. We have a Phobos Lieutenant, as well as a Combi Lieutenant and Vulcan Heston. The Phobos Lieutenant is an interesting inclusion. I was actually wondering if this guy would ever see play. He does have the ability to advance and shoot, thanks to the detachment ability. He gives everybody assaults, and then he himself can move d6 inches after shooting. It's not a leadership ability that gives him his Fire and Fade style of effect. It's just a thing that he does on his unit. So he himself, for only 55 points, is able to run around the table at incredible speeds. He even has Deep Strike, Infiltrate, and Scout built in, so he's going to be able to basically set up wherever he wants, and then you can use him for a variety of utility or disruption effects. It's a really cool little unit that doesn't see very much play because he's overshadowed by the Combi Weapon Lieutenant. However, in this case, we're just bringing both, so it's fine. We have an Impulsor to carry around one of the 2 Blade Guard veteran squads in the army. We also then have a Repulsor Executioner and a Land Raider Redeemer, so we do have ways to carry around all of our melee infantry. One of those Blade Guard veteran squads is going to attach with the Judiciar for fights first and ignore modifiers. The other one will attach to Adrax Agatone for effectively full hit and wound rerolls from him. The unit gets reroll 1s to hit. He gives them rerolls to wound. The only thing they don't reroll is 2s to hit, but obviously Adrax's Thunderhammer does hit on 2s, and then rerolling wound rolls makes him one of the more effective combat characters in the entire Space Marine Codex. From there, we have a trio of Eradicator squads, just 3 bands with a single multi-melta in each. Again, we can embark those guys into the Redeemers or into the Repulsors. An Infernus Marine squad to benefit from Vulcan's buff to get additional OC characteristic, a single Invader ATV with a multi-melta, the Land Raider Redeemer I mentioned earlier, 1 Repulsor to carry around some of those infantry units, 1 Executioner for some long-range shooting, and again, more transport plus a scout squad. This list is going to use a lot of the transport synergies that Firestorm Assault Force allows you to get out of your transport and shoot back at enemies that shoot you. If we have something like the inclusion of both the Infernus Marine squad and an Eradicator squad, you kind of have a lot of interesting options for units that can disembark and attack back into enemies if you need them to. You also, interestingly, have the Judiciar, who can disembark a transport after you shoot it to then absorb charges, and with fights first and ignore modifiers has a pretty good chance of killing whatever tries to engage the vehicle. So you can kind of gotcha people with that a little bit. They shoot the vehicle to soften it up, you disembark the Judiciar, they charge into the vehicle and either hit the Judiciar or you heroically intervene and then kill them. Pretty neat, because you get to fight first. I really like it. There's a lot of interesting synergies inside this army that are not super apparent from the outset, but once you start to see them in play, are very cool. That's one of the cool things that Salamanders does inside Firestorm Assault Force, and one of the things, unfortunately, in many cases, it's missing in its new Codex detachment, in its new chapter-specific detachment. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, whether it's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, as always, or if you're a YouTube channel member or a Twitch subscriber. All you people are awesome. Also, the Standoff for sponsoring the video. I appreciate them. And don't forget to check out my coverage of the Tennessee Elite Open from this past weekend. Again, link in the video description. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.